Well, greetings, you politically curious Herle Burly-ites. Fred DeLorey is here, making his second appearance on the show, which means he's dangerously close to becoming an official friend of the pod. That gets him a t-shirt and a questionably handsome mug because it has my face on it. Fred, we're lucky to have him. Fred is a longtime conservative strategist and campaign director. He was the national campaign manager for Erin O'Toole in 2021, and that's when he came on the show and we rehashed that election campaign together. Before that, he was the director of field operations for Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He did well. And former director of political operations for Stephen Harper, won the odd election, as well as director of comms and national spokesperson. And today he's the chair and chief strategy officer at NorthStar Public Affairs and can occasionally be heard on a competitor podcast of ours, and always wise when he's on there. So with that kind of CV, you'd expect we'd talk about the current state and prospects of the Conservative Party, which we will. But I also want to take this conversation in another direction. Fred's a longtime party and campaign operative, as you've just heard. And we talk a lot on the pod about what makes a party succeed. And I want to dive into what can break a party with specific reference to Canada's NDP, and specifically with regard to money and the importance of money in politics. Given the dismal results of the last election, is the NDP facing bankruptcy to the point where their existence is threatened? And Fred wrote a very interesting piece about this, and he also knows what it takes to run a campaign. So I thought we'd get together and we'd talk about the impact of the polarization of Canadian politics and whether it's permanent and what's going to happen to the NDP and all the issues around that. And Fred, you've been doing a lot of thinking about it, so thanks for coming on to talk to me about it. Really glad you agreed to do this.
No, look, thanks for having me on. I think it's a fascinating subject. It's something that's always interested me when I see the state of political parties and how they're operating, having been someone that's worked so much of my life inside the Conservative Party, in particular. It's always fascinated me how parties function and how they work and how they can get things done.
Yeah, and they are all different.
They are. There's a lot of similarities, but they are different. And the NDP is more different, I think, in the way they treat their riding associations than the other parties, and I think that impacts their issues now. And I think that's going to be something that's going to hurt them long term, given the election results, which we can get more into the weeds in a bit, whenever.
Yeah, let's do that. But let's just go back and level set. The election was 3 months ago, and I don't know if it feels much longer than that to you, but it feels like it has been a long time since the election. But when you're thinking about it, what's your overall take on what happened in that campaign?
Well, it's funny. You're looking at it and you see the campaign itself and where we are now and the type of government we seem to have now. For the most part, it feels like we all predicted a conservative majority 6 months ago. But 3 months ago, it feels like we elected a progressive conservative government in many ways. And I think that's what I've been calling this Carney government, is a progressive conservative government. It's not the traditional, or at least the Trudeau liberal. It's definitely a deviation from that. So in that context, the game has shifted significantly.
Right. Right. None of the other parties seemed ready for the Liberals to change their leader, even though it seemed, everybody knew Trudeau wanted to stay on, but it still seemed quite possible they would change their leader because the Liberals have a very strong survival instinct and things were really bad. And it just seems like the NDP and the Conservatives and the Bloc were all caught completely sort of off guard by that and weren't ready for a new Liberal leader.
Yeah, there was a big part of that, where it's also the Trump thing they also were caught off guard for and didn't know how to handle. So there's two major shifts that happened, and they weren't able to adjust. I know the Conservatives spent a ton of money trying to make Carney look like Trudeau 2.0, which just didn't fit his messaging, didn't fit who he is, didn't fit,
Right.
I thought, when I was on CBC's coverage at the Liberal convention when Carney won the leadership. And I remember I was critical of, his stance on carbon tax, things that were still very much aligned with Trudeau. I don't know if we thought he would pivot that quickly and, immediately get rid of the carbon tax. Things like that differentiated himself from Trudeau. So he actually, to his credit, he really turned the page from Trudeau, where the other parties weren't able to tie him to him.
A couple of years ago, I was talking to Carney about Carney with some senior conservative strategists, people that were involved in the campaign ultimately. And they were not worried about him for reasons I thought were good and valid, because they thought he was so wrong for the times, that we were in such a populist era and he was such an exemplar of the international elite that he would be fun to run against. Um, why didn't that land?
Well, they were wrong. I mean, the timing was perfect for Carney. When we had the massive threat of Trump, what better than a strong CV, a former governor of the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England. But going back to the 21 campaign where I was campaign manager, I remember there was rumblings that Carney was going to run for Trudeau then. And it was making me nervous. And I went out and we did a huge research project to try to get a grasp of what that may mean. And it scared the shit out of me when I saw the numbers because Canadians, they had no idea who Mark Carney was. But that resume, that it pops, and people want a serious leader for serious times. And this was during the middle of the pandemic. So the threat was always there. And I think the Conservatives certainly felt the threat was there. If you look at, they spent a lot of money on ads even before he was leader of the party. Like they were attacking him. They tried to bring him to committee. There was a fear of it there. They just never figured out how to deal with it. And I'm
Right.
not sure they will.
They were probably right about the elite thing until Trump came along.
Right. That
Right.
yeah, the elite, like, right during the pre-Trump era, or era 2.0.
Mm.
Um, if you look at where Canada was and the way Poilievre was resonating and his rallies and what they were hearing, that was a bit of a closed circle, closed loop in what they were hearing all the time. But there's no question that there was this real globalist thing within the conservative movement that I've never quite understood, or how big it really is in the Canadian public. So I can see them feeling that way. But you're right. Once Trump entered, I think people realized we do need to open up into the get into the world and our products to market now.
Yeah. So the NDP um, suffered a. Let's get into the NDP and start with their election result. Why do you think their vote dropped so precipitously? Why do you think they were so vulnerable in this campaign? Haven't seen anything like it since 1993. What happened? What happened to them? Is it the confidence and supply agreement, and they got all mixed up with Trudeau, or they have a bad campaign strategy, or Trump rendered them irrelevant? There can be a million theories, but they didn't seem ready to run a campaign to me.
Right.
And Jennifer Howard was on the podcast, and we had a really interesting conversation about politics, but it seemed almost entirely divorced from the reality that they were in.
Yeah, I think the NDP, there's a number of factors where I think they went wrong, or what caused them to get basically wiped off the map. Um, we presidentialize our races. Our leaders have tremendous power within our parties. I think the NDP had an historically terrible leader that really didn't put in the hours. He didn't work. He didn't care. Or I should say he didn't care. I'm sure he cared, but he wasn't hungry. He didn't want to go out there and do the work. When you're a leader of a political party, David, you worked with lots of leaders at all levels. It's a 24/7 job.
Yep.
It's not a 9 to 5, 4 or 5 days a week. It is a full time. It is your life, and it wasn't his. And I think he just didn't put it in, and he never really grasped federal politics. I think he always struggled with it since he came onto the federal scene. So I think that was the biggest problem they had, started at the top with the leader. But then, of course, there was the dynamics. There was Poilievre. I'm a conservative, and I want to see him to be prime minister someday if he's the leader of our party. I think he scared a lot of voters away from the NDP, the progressive vote.
More than, say, O'Toole would have in 2021.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, O'Toole, I mean, everyone was attacking O'Toole for not being conservative enough. It wasn't that he was scary. It was that he was too centrist, and
Right.
so too much of a progressive conservative was one of his. And that hurt us on the bit of the far right, where the People's Party was able to eat a bit of our vote there. Poilievre was able to go after that People's Party vote and annihilate them. But I think people are afraid of certain leaders, and the tone that Poilievre had. just turned a lot of people off, and it became a big problem.
So, last few weeks in this space, we've gotten into some in-depth arguments about the business of wholesale fiber internet. This week, I'm giving you all a cheat code to simplify things. It's 3 words. Follow the money. To catch you up, our presenting sponsor, TELUS, is wholesaling internet fiber services in Ontario and Quebec after a CRTC decision allowed it, based on substantial consumer benefit. Bell has been aggressively lobbying to stop TELUS and other providers from getting wholesale access to their fiber networks. They argue it undermines the whole business case for continuing fiber investment. Cabinet has been formally petitioned to overturn the CRTC decision. So, friends, follow the money. Bell just invested $5 billion in Ziply Fiber, the leading wholesale fiber internet provider in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Why would Bell invest 5 billion big ones in the US if they don't believe in the economics of wholesaling fiber? Follow the money. Bell gets $73 from TELUS for each new internet subscriber TELUS signs up. It's the CRTC mandated rate. Bell puts that money straight into their pocket, 100% gross profit. Why are they arguing they can't invest in Canada when that profit could be put directly and immediately into building new infrastructure? Follow the money. That $73 per subscriber Bell receives from TELUS on the wholesale side, Bell retails the same services to their own customers at $60. You can't claim wholesale access undermines industry pricing models when you receive more for each wholesale customer than you charge your own customers. The CRTC sets the rate of $73 expressly to balance any concerns about business viability and ongoing investment. They've determined the number is more than enough to support it. When you charge less, you're artificially, temporarily deflating your rate. It amounts to predatory and illusory pricing. So Bell's stance isn't really about economic viability. It's about market control, an attempt to stifle real competition in Ontario and Quebec. And if Cabinet would just follow the money, they could see that it's Canadians who stand to lose. Okay, so you've written a piece about how the NDP's bad result could become permanent because of the financial implications of the result. Can you walk us through your thesis there?
Yeah, so the NDP historically for many years they would never run a full campaign. They wouldn't get the full amount to spend, um, and then be able to spend it. Under during the Jack Layton years, they were able to accumulate some wealth there, particularly in the ridings where they have a different. We mentioned earlier that how the parties are similar but different. They have this weird rule that I think is quite anti-democratic in many ways, but they have this rule where riding associations have to give 100% of their campaign returns to the national party. And that's not like a lot of people get confused with that and think it's just the deposit, the $1,000 or whatever it is that used to have to spend to run. It's 60% of your expenses. So if you spend $100,000 in a riding, you get $60,000 back, and the NDP would accumulate that from all of their ridings. They made it a rule. I don't know if the Liberals, maybe
I think the Liberals scoop some of it. I don't know if they
I think
scoop
it's
it
a
all, but they
percentage.
scoop some of it.
Right. The Conservatives never did. In
And they
2019,
make you sign in advance that you will do that or
yeah,
something being.
to be a candidate, right?
Yeah,
To be a candidate, you have to agree to give this return.
yeah.
So they were able to leverage that into bigger loans and more money. They also had this other asset that was donated to them before the rules changed, which is now that we know it as the Jack Layton building, which is their headquarters in downtown Ottawa. And it's a very valuable asset, and they can now leverage that when they get loans. The problem they have now, I'm told during this, I was told before and during the election, they got the full loan, which is around 30 some million dollars, or the full amount to spend. Um, and I've been told that they've spent it, that they spent it. Now, I did question that into my piece. I did mention I'm skeptical that they spent the full amount because I don't know if you like
I didn't
that.
see it.
I didn't see it either. Doesn't mean they didn't put into a lot of different ridings or workers and different techniques or tactics that we didn't see. But I question whether they did it. If they did
Hell,
spend,
they barely had a tour. They didn't put on an event, Fred.
right. So, but if are they paying their workers in the ridings? Like, where did the money go? And that's where I'm curious if they did spend it, because if they've spent that amount, and now that going back to the rebates that they get from the ridings, you have to get over 10% in the riding to get the rebate. So if they failed to do that in the vast majority of ridings, I think it was only 50 ridings that they qualified, where they used to get hundreds of ridings used to qualify. That's
Hmm.
millions of dollars in losses that they need to pay, and you have 3 years to pay your loan off, and then there's serious consequences afterwards.
Are there really though? I mean, the reason I ask is I know that you cited how strict they are, Elections Canada, about this.
Mhm.
But the rules, as I understand it, about running for leader make it almost impossible that you don't end up owing Elections Canada, sorry, money on your leadership campaign for some time after you run for leader. I don't know what your experience has been,
Running
but
for leader, I don't think you can get a bank loan. If you can, it's not for a large amount though, right? If you own
no,
tens of millions of dollars
no.
or millions of dollars, if you're not, the rules are after
There's
three.
one liberal candidate that mortgaged their house and they can't raise the money to pay it back. So I mean, it just at the end of the day, what are they going to do? Put people in jail over this?
Yes, potentially. So that's the thing with Elections Canada. And in my piece, I mentioned this where there was a conservative official agent in a riding association during and you'll be familiar with this time frame, the 2004, 2006, 2008 era, where we had three elections in that 4 years.
Yeah.
One official agent, a conservative guy in a riding out in BC, opened the bank account. They ran the campaign. He emptied the bank account at the end of it, did all the filings. The auditing was still going on. Another election is called. Bank account is still there. There's not a dime in it. He used it again. So he used the bank account and that's illegal. He had to close the bank account. So there's one small technical matter and he got
Mm,
charged and had to go to court for that matter and had to
right.
like fight it in court and there was appeals and it was just like I believe he may have died in the process. I think he passed away during all of that. So it's just so yes, there is the possibility of the official agent could be charged with something. Now, whether they'll actually go that far to jail time, very unlikely. But it's still one of those things that they could be in that situation.
Right. The real question for me though is whether they can get off the mat like this. So from this. So they did raise 20 million bucks, I think, in 2021. I think that's the most money they've ever raised in a year. 2021, they raised 20 million bucks. So if they can do that in a year, presumably they can get their way out of this, right?
It all comes down to leader and leadership and who is there that pops and who's the person. And there's an opportunity. I mentioned Carney's a progressive conservative, Pierre Poilievre's a conservative. That leaves a whole swath of Canadians who are on the progressive side that may be more looking for something at some point. So if they can get a leader that could fundraise and make money and build them up, they certainly can. But looking at the financials that just came out yesterday, I believe, for quarter 2 of this year, which would have included the election, the NDP barely out fundraised the Green Party.
Right.
So there is a space for a left-wing party in Canada, and it'll be interesting if the NDP can fill that and get back to being that.
Well, they do have this relationship with the public sector unions, who have, over the years been a pretty reliable supporter, and I think to the extent possible, financier. So that's a bulwark they have against going under, isn't it?
For sure. No, they do have that there if they can maintain it. And that is, again, what is interesting with the shift of the Liberal Party going from like Trudeau was eating their lunch for years. Like he moved the Liberal Party to the left. But there's no party on the left anymore that has standing. So, or official party status. So there is opportunity there, absolutely, for them to grow and get into that.
Right. Is there any way that the unions can keep money that can help them defray these costs that you're talking about? Is there ways that you can get union money in there?
Not legally, not in a way. I mean, and I should say there is legally, there is ways that they can in terms of fundraising and pushing, but It's not easy for them to do. It's not like they can actually turn over their own dues. They can encourage people, I suppose, to donate NDP. But now we're seeing one of these movements now. There's different grassroots movements of the NDP that I referenced in the piece who are upset at the central party and saying, don't donate to the NDP,
Right.
donate to the local riding associations. So that again, now that kind of eats into their fundraising as well, if that gets legs in terms of where the money goes.
Well, that's right. And they could also end up, given that force within the party, end up with a really terrible leadership choice that makes them non-viable. Um, so um, all this has to do with when can the NDP conceivably be ready to fight an election. And all of this is terribly important, mostly to the Conservatives, um, who can't really, let's put it this way, much rather be fighting the Liberals with the NDP between 15 and 20 points than with the NDP between 6 and 12 points, right?
Yeah,
So, like in the 1990s, right, this is such a critical question. And it's not all an insult to the Conservatives. It's just the way math works. Is in the 1990s, people always talk about how the divisions on the right created those liberal majorities. And that is, of course, in part true. But the part of it that people don't recall is that the NDP was almost dying as a movement in Canada at that time because uh, primarily of provincial politics, because Bob Rae's government had destroyed the NDP brand in Ontario,
right.
and Glenn Clark's government at the same time had destroyed the NDP brand in British Columbia, their two most important provinces, right? And they had nothing going on, and they were getting 6-7% of the vote. And that allowed not just Chrétien to win, but the Chrétien government to pursue a policy agenda ignoring what was left to the left of them. There was nothing to the left of them. And that's probably how Carney feels right now, that he doesn't need to worry about that.
Right.
Right. And therefore he can push Poilievre, and there isn't much space for Poilievre to be a reasonable conservative. He's got to be an extreme conservative. So what Poilievre needs is for the NDP to yank Carney back, right? To create some space in the middle. Am I going on too long here? This is how this works. This
You're
is what the Conservatives need, right?
It's funny you say this because I got a lot of feedback when I wrote my NDP piece from New Democrats saying and insinuating that I want to see the party die, and that's why I'm writing this to solve issues with them. And it's like, guys, I'm a federal conservative. My party cannot win without you. We need
Right.
you to exist, and we need you to be strong. The one time in the 20 years I've worked in federal politics that we won a majority is when the NDP did their very best in 2011. So there is no path for us without a strong New Democratic Party. So yeah, that argument there is just a wash. We need them. And I think at the same time, they do have a voice in Parliament that is worth having, right? They have issues that do get missed by the other parties. So there's value in having them as a political force in this country.
So grain season starts this week. Most Canadians at the moment probably have other things on their mind. But believe me when I say grain and grain season are a big deal. Canadian grain is recognized as the best in the world. And with the dreadful aggression in Ukraine continuing to disrupt production there, Canada's role in feeding the world is all the more crucial. And our sponsor, CN, will be moving a staggering amount of Western grain to market. The railway reckons it will be hauling something between 27 and 29 million metric tons out of the Canadian prairies between now and the end of this winter, assuming no major disruptions to our supply chains. That means about 7,800 rail cars a week this summer and fall, and about 6,200 cars a week once winter arrives. CN has grown significantly more muscular at moving grain in the past 5 years. It has spent heavily on expanding its fleet of hopper cars, those ingenious things I've discussed here several times in the past. The railway has purchased more than 4,000 since 2018. Hopper cars are wide at the top, narrowing to a spout, making use of gravity to unload grain efficiently on arrival. The name originated from the way grain or beans or any other product move around or jump as they're fed out of the spout. Anyway, CN now manages a fleet of nearly 14,000 hopper cars, more than adequate to ensure a steady flow of high-quality Canadian grain to ports west and east and points in between. And to haul them, CN has acquired more than 300 high-horsepower locomotives in recent years. I've said this before. Well-managed companies take care to plow a considerable share of their profits back into their operations. Canada's farmers work hard to produce their excellent product. CN will be there to finish the job. You said there's no path. And it's possible, especially if you're right about their financial situation, it's possible that the Conservatives have to find a path to do that, right? Have to find a path to get 46, 47% of the vote in a truly polarized, certainly in English Canada. I can see the Bloc coming back more easily than the NDP in the short term. So certainly, but in English Canada, a polarized result. Let's start with the elimination of the PPC. Do you consider that an accomplishment?
Well, I don't know if they're eliminated. I mean, Max Bernier.
Well, sorry, they were
No,
driven
but
down to,
yeah,
yeah.
but it's not a comp. Look, we did not win the election, so and they're still ticking. They're still making money. Max Bernier is still paying himself a salary, and he'll be around for the next election. And if they are able to get some kind of issue base that works for them, then they're still there. 2011 or 21, sorry, the COVID campaign, they were able to run an anti-mandate campaign that got them up to 5% nationally. Who knows the
But
next election? They could
you
have
made
something.
a choice when you were running that campaign.
Yep.
You made a choice not to adopt a policy position that would drive them to zero, right? Because presumably you assumed there were consequences to that action. So were there consequences in this election to the Conservatives' determination to take out the PPC?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. In 21, if we had have gone after that PPC vote, and we put a lot of research into that too, to get a sense of where it was going and what would happen if we went that way. Not that the leader Erin O'Toole never would have gone that way, but to see what would happen, we would have got, it would have been a large majority government for the Liberals in 21 if we even tried to go anti-mandate at that time, given what was happening, what public views were on COVID. In this election, there's no question a lot of people voted Carney because they didn't like Poilievre. And that's a tone issue and that's a message issue. I still think there is a path for Poilievre. It is incredibly narrow, it's steep, it's rocky for him to become prime minister, and he has to be willing to go find that path and march up it. And I'm not sure that's where he is right now, but there is a path. But yeah, I agree with you that this is we are not set up for a two-party fight. We are set up for a three-party fight, and if things continue on this way, which they likely will, our party needs to adapt if we want to compete. And if we don't, we are doomed to repeat exactly what just happened this year.
So are we really going back into the old debate about progressive conservative version of the party versus the Reform Party version of the party? Not that the PCs won all that much, but people don't, I mean, history is a complex thing, right? They didn't win. The PCs didn't win that much because they were losing Quebec so badly to the Liberals,
Yeah.
right? They regularly won English Canada. Joe Clark, poor Joe is seen as the schmo of Canadian politics historically, crushed Pierre Trudeau in English Canada in 1979, crushed him,
Yeah.
right? And just he,
As did Bob Stanfield, right? Like just
right.
absolutely wiped them out. But
So, in a world in which the Liberals don't dominate Quebec the way Lester Pearson and Pierre Trudeau did, right? Then a more moderate conservative party should theoretically be a competitor to win quite regularly. I
yes.
put that to you as a hypothesis.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to say it again.
What I'm saying is that if Quebec is not, if the Liberals aren't winning Quebec by 70 seats, and so really English Canada is determining the election result in large measure, a more moderate version of the Conservative Party would have won a lot of elections historically,
Mhm.
um, in that scenario. And is that I mean, this, we've been having this fight with various people, this conversation, this dialogue with various people. What is the best route for a competitive Conservative Party? Is it to be relatively centrist, compete with the Liberals on the margin of activity in the middle, or is it a ideologically movement-driven Conservative Party that is motivated and activated and gives money and works hard and turns out, but really has the capacity to only attract, you know, 30 to 35% of the vote?
Yeah, well, look, we only win when we're fighting for that middle vote. That's where the vast majority of Canadians are. So if we are focused on the right, we are writing off our chances of victory. It's just simple math. There's, the research we've seen, and you've probably seen something similar. 60% of Canadians identify as progressive versus 40% conservative. Now, Polyev got over that 40%, but that the rest of it united behind Carney in large parts. So it is a challenge for us, and there is no
Do you think
path.
Charest would have beat him?
Do I think Charest? I have no idea what Charest is like. I don't know Charest. I've seen him a few times. I've been asked a lot, and I'll say this here, I've never said this publicly. I've been asked a lot since the election, could Erin O'Toole have beaten
Right.
Carney? And my answer is he would never have faced Carney because he would have beat Trudeau a couple of years ago. I think if he stayed on, we would have had an election. I don't think the NDP would have been as afraid of an O'Toole government. And I think there could have been some kind of discussion or arrangement where they would have taken Trudeau down earlier and not let him go the way he did, and we would have beat him then. Um, so that's my answer to that.
That's a really clever answer because, again, the NDP are such huge actors in this story. Because had they pulled the plug on the government, say last fall, they were ahead of the Liberals in English Canada. They were tied with them in national polls. Polyev was going to win so many seats. The Liberals were going to get destroyed. Uh, the NDP had that all in the palm of their hand,
They,
and they say they did it out of fear of Polyev. So maybe that's right.
That's it, and that's what I've had that conversation with a lot of New Democrats when I say, hey, if you had pulled the trigger 6 months ago, Jagmeet Singh would be leader of the official opposition right now. Your party would be in second place. You'd be in a strong spot instead of where it is now. But then they just say, well, but Pierre Poilievre would be prime minister in a majority government,
Right.
and that scared them.
Right.
And there's times when the NDP have been someone we can work with. Harper worked with them. They supported us at times on different items. But in the 19 campaign, they were very clear they wouldn't support Scheer. In the 21 campaign, they never said anything. They refused to say whether they would support O'Toole at any time.
Right. Right. Um, so as they rebuild the NDP, they have to make a choice about what kind of party they are. And one of the things that's happened is Conservatives have been taking their working class vote. And the NDP have been competing in urban areas with the Liberals for a sort of a university educated,
Champagne socialists. Yeah.
woke voter, right? And the more they've appealed to that voter, the less they've appealed to the working class
Yeah.
voter. Um, they have, as Corey tonight always says on our Curse of Politics podcast, they have a different theory in Western Canada where they win provincially and tend to be more successful. Um, but nationally, there's this movement that wants to take them even more, I think, in that direction. But do you see a way back for them into the working class voter? Do you see room for left-wing populism, economic populism in Canada?
For sure. Again, it comes back to what we said at the beginning of this about leadership. If they have a leader that can appeal, that can resonate, that can pop. And it's not about having a group of policies or different ideas. It's about having someone who can communicate directly and well to them. And that's their opportunity in this leadership race. If they find that, I have no idea who that person is for the NDP. I don't know that party that well to even know who their leadership frontrunners are. But if they have that type of working class, uh, blue collar person that could just pop through, a Doug Ford type of the NDP,
Right.
someone that people like and that's just a good person, could go a long way to absolutely do that. And then speaks with credibility, as well. Someone that's actually been in the trenches working in, those type of jobs.
They seem to have that in BC for a time with John Horgan.
Y- yes,
Right.
absolutely. He was fantastic for that, right? He was a guy that definitely popped through on that. He was, you could see like rural small C conservative voters, could vote NDP if you have that type of leader.
Right. Right. Um, One of the things I'm curious that I like to ask conservatives about is why you think that once the election became about Canada versus the US and protecting Canada, that the conservatives were at a disadvantage. Why did people not trust the Conservative Party to defend Canada's interest in the way uh, that they thought the Liberal Party would?
Well, yeah, I question whether if that was something overwhelmingly people felt, if it was a trust issue with the conservatives or tone or where they felt they were. I don't know if they felt, I don't, because I don't
Well,
think.
let's take the Carney's tremendous advantage that he had among boomers, among people my age, right? Lots of older people normally vote conservative, but he just clobbered that market,
Right.
right? Why?
Look, I think one thing that cannot be forgotten is Carney's resume. Back to the 21 campaign when I did the research on it, like people love the idea of a governor of a Bank of Canada and a Bank of England, like that pedigree of someone that is on the global world stage that has the experience, even though we don't quite understand who he is or what that experience means. I think that popped through. So I don't know if it's so much a mistrust of Polyev and more of just a trust in the resume. And I think that's what people voted for ultimately was a resume. I don't think people knew really who Carney was, and we're still kind of figuring out who he is today.
Yeah, yeah. But but wait a second. People were really prepared to shift. I want to just challenge you on this a little bit because so there were a lot of people that had been for 2 or 3 years knowing that they were going to vote conservative,
Knowing they were going to vote against Trudeau.
knowing they were going to vote against Trudeau. Fair
I
enough.
think there's two
And all
different.
of a sudden they said, well, that option that I was going to vote for is not the right option for this particular circumstance. And so, what is it? Was it dealing with Trump and fighting Canada, or is it rebuilding the Canadian economy, or what circumstance wasn't Poilievre right for?
Right. Well, again, I think it's more of, so you're saying Trudeau's gone, Trump is a threat. And then you're comparing these two people now. It's a
Yeah.
fresh, you're this person you've never really heard of before, Mark Carney, but you may understand his resume. I think Carney's just his resume and everything just punches through so powerful. And again, with the tone issues that I think Poilievre had, just turned people off at some level. And it just made it easy to go to Carney. But I don't know if it's a full rejection of Poilievre. I don't think people were looking at it at that
Mhm.
level of that.
So there are different models of conservatism arising around the country. Doug Ford has one, and people have views about it. Pierre Poilievre has another. One that you would be really familiar with because you're from Nova Scotia is Tim Houston.
Mhm.
And what kind of a conservative brand is he building out there, and is it transportable nationally? Because it seems pretty successful.
It's very successful. He's done a lot there. He's just won the largest number of seats in provincial history, and we have the oldest democracy in North America, so it says a lot. His brand is similar to Premier Ford's. It's a progressive conservative. It's a pragmatic, get things done, and look what's in front of us. He was first elected. Healthcare was the number one issue that he ran on, which is not something that typical conservatives campaigns focus on and that win on. and he's done tremendous work on that front. They've done it by modernizing the system there and opening up things in terms of the technology and the stuff we're using. And now Nova Scotia has a history of being hard to do business in. And one of the new focuses he has is getting the no out of Nova Scotia and opening up the economy. So it's a progressive conservative type movement that can definitely work, and he's been very successful at that.
Right. Does he have the chops?
I think he does. I don't know what his French is at, but I've known Premier Houston for a long, long time. I ran federally in 2015, where he was a local MLA at the time, so got to know him well there. He's a tremendous leader, and I think he's getting a lot done in the province. And he's built his leadership on breaking down the interprovincial trade barriers. He's the first to put the real aggressive bill in Nova Scotia on that. I think has shown that it's built up his brand across the country. Now, I don't know if he ever will. I think he quite enjoys being Premier of Nova Scotia. And again, we have a leader in Poilievre, so it's not like it's open anyway.
No, that's all right. It's not under question at all. It's not an issue. Who would be talking about it? He'd be crazy. So I had Scott Aitchison on the program a few weeks ago, and he was a very thoughtful guy, and we had a great discussion about housing policy. Now, I had not been able to have a Conservative MP on the show for several years before the election. And so they hadn't really been anywhere in the public domain.
Right.
So if there's going to be a loosening up of that, if there's going to be more freedom for caucus members to express themselves and to develop personas, who should we look out for? Where's the real talent in there?
Oh, interesting. There's a lot. There's Adam Chambers is someone who comes.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. I like Adam.
Really smart guy. Real good fiscal grasp. He worked in the Harper era, in the Harper government under Minister Flaherty. So he's someone who's very, very solid. Ellis Ross out in BC. I believe he's the Environment Shadow Minister right now, former Indigenous chief. Has a great grasp of, and he's the type of conservative. He's like, to me, is a Doug Ford type conservative that I think can resonate.
Well, he was actually a Christy Clark liberal, wasn't he?
BC liberal, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Yes. I want to make very clear to listeners, BC liberal, which obviously is a progressive conservative type government.
Yeah. So Ellis Ross, who else? Keep going.
Okay, let's think of the caucus. Look, Melissa Lanceman's a longtime friend and a great communicator. I think she is someone to always keep an eye on, and someone that can do a lot. In the Senate, I'm going to jump to the Senate because I think Leo Housakis is a rare senator who really pops through. He's the leader of the Conservative caucus in the Senate, and he's actually grown the Conservative Senate caucus since he became leader. A number of senators have come over to the party under his leadership, which was fascinating to see.
Right. Yeah. Listen. All right. Listen, Fred. Thanks for joining us for a quick chat on a Thursday afternoon, summertime pod. You really are making a great contribution, by the way, writing and commenting. So thanks for sharing your next gen understanding of of elections with old folks like me. If you're kicking around Ottawa at all, let me know. I'm just outside. Maybe grab a drink or something.
Love to.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming on. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. And by God, another tough day for the NDP. We'll see you next week with more of the Herle Burly.